The Waco History Podcast is sponsored by Brotherwell Brewery on Historic Bridge Street in Waco.
Cross the Brazos at Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos at Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
Well, this is the Waco History Podcast. This is the third episode in our Cameron Park series, and I've been chasing Larry Sims down for a while to sit down with me and talk about his experiences in Cameron Park. If you haven't listened to the first two, one episode was Mark Furman doing some of the history of the park, and then Kenna Lang Archer talked about her work on kind of the flora and fauna of Cameron Park. And then Larry Sims has his own stories to tell about his experiences with the park. But before I get to that, Larry, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background before we get to the Cameron Park part of your story, which you spent many years in the park. But can you talk a little bit about kind of your background, your professional background before that? Because I think it's important in the ways in which the park story plays out.
Yes, I actually got into law enforcement through DPS. I was a highway patrolman for a couple of years, and I didn't like where I was stationed, which is actually Killeen, and so I went to work. I resigned from there and went to work for Waco, and I worked for Waco for about 8 years, and then I became a park ranger after that. So I actually worked in the park before the city had park rangers.
Oh, okay.
So I was familiar with the park long before we had park rangers in the early 80s, in the late 70s.
Okay.
So I had actually worked in there and witnessed some of the activity that had taken place in there. So I was familiar with it when I became a park ranger.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I know you became a ranger in 86, but you're saying for years before that you were in the park.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to go back even before that, because you're a native Wacoan.
Yes.
And so you had experiences with the park even before that. And
yes.
Talk a little bit about maybe where you grew up and maybe some experiences you had with the park when you were younger.
I actually grew up in East Waco in Estella Maxey, so I wasn't far from the park. And as a kid in school, we actually rode bicycles to the park. We went down to the river and fished and kind of did it all. So I was very familiar with Cameron Park long before I got into law enforcement or became an adult. So I went down there, hunted pecans, like I say, fished down there, rode bicycles. So we participated in Cameron Park for a long, long time.
Can you talk about the areas of the park you would use when you were growing up, kind of areas of park you would go to?
Mainly Pecan Bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly Pecan Bottom, because the other areas was a little complicated to get to. You know, I mean, it was kind of uphill, and so we mainly frequent Pecan Bottom area.
Yeah, if I was riding a bike with no gears, I would not frequent Lover's Leap or anything.
It's kind of the way we felt too.
And is that before Herring Avenue Bridge was put in?
Yes.
Okay. And so how would you kind of get in and out of the park? Which way did you go?
Waco Drive Bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a long way around,
Yeah.
but it was the only way around. So we would go to Waco Drive Bridge and go back to Waco Drive Bridge.
Okay. Yeah, that was the only way to get back and forth across, yeah. And you said you'd go over and fish, and what are some other things you would do in the park?
Just we'd fish and we'd hunt pecans, and we just be in the park, so to speak. I mean, we were youngsters, and just being away from home, being out in the park, riding bicycles. We didn't do a lot of football playing in the park. We just kind of hung around in the park. You know?
And could you get some pretty good fish out of the Brazos then?
For us, because we didn't know a lot about fishing, it was perch. I mean, it wasn't bass, or it wasn't. You may occasionally get a catfish or something, but it was mainly just perch.
Yeah, and was this before kind of the low water dam had stabilized the lake level?
Long before it was Brazos River during that time. It was long before they had put in a stable dam to be able to call it a lake, you know. So and you go down there one day and it's empty, You go down there a week later and it's full. It's kind of the way you dealt with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't actually fishing for supper.
Yeah.
You know, we were just fishing to be fishing.
Yeah, because, you don't want to make a supper off perch.
No.
That's really interesting that you had that early kind of experience with the park.
Yes.
So what did the park kind of represent for you when you were a kid as far as a place?
Just a place to go and a place to have fun. I mean, and there again, you know, back when I was growing up, you only had 2 television channels, you know, and if the parents was watching television, you were kind of out. So we just basically hung out. It's what we did. You know, we went to the park and we played and we stayed and we went home after that. So it was just a place to go. Yeah. Which was different from being in the front yard.
Yeah. And you had freedom to go there and come back and
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. We'll talk a little bit then about the park when you came back professionally and you're working for the city and you're having some experiences in it in the late 70s and early 80s, maybe before you became a park ranger, what the park was like. Just describe for us.
When I came back as a police officer, the park had changed dramatically. It basically became a traffic problem, and it developed a lot of other issues because there wasn't any authority in the park. So we had people doing all kind of we had all kind of activity going on in the park. In the city of Waco recognized it in the mid 70s. Mm-hmm. They realized, hey, we got a problem. We need to do something about it. So they started assigning police officers to work down there. And so I had on occasion, and it wasn't a regular deal, but on occasion, and it was mainly weekend. You know, they would assign 2 officers to work down there, and we basically just kind of monitored to make sure that that we could kind of control the traffic best we could. Which was the hardest thing we had going in the park, and so I was familiar with it from that aspect as far as when I became a park ranger and was actually assigned down there and was dealing with different issues. But it had become in the early 70s, it had become a kind of a total different monster, so to speak, because of it was extremely crowded. It was extremely crowded on Sunday. With having a circle, it created a traffic problem because all you needed was one vehicle to stop traffic. And it backed up traffic all the way back down past the old stables on University Parks Drive. And basically everything came to a halt at that point. And some of the biggest issues I had when I actually worked down there was being able to get emergency vehicles in and out. Couldn't do it. You literally couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And we always was fearful of somebody getting injured because they were doing, when I went in as a park ranger, they were doing a whole lot of things that shouldn't be going on down there. And and for an example, there was a couple of guys that would actually bring horses down to the park, and they would race in the middle of the park, and there was people everywhere. There was kids everywhere. So if one of those kids get run over by a horse, you got a problem. You got a big problem. You got a problem for getting emergency vehicles down there, and you got a problem with whoever kid just got run over. So those were some of the issues we dealt with when we went in as park rangers.
Now, when you were there with the police force, of course, the layout of traffic is different there now. I mean, that's all changed. Can you describe what it was like then and where the bottlenecks were, where were the problem areas there?
When I was a policeman?
Yeah.
Well, the circle wasn't taken out till I became a park ranger. About 3 years into being a park ranger when the circle actually got taken out, if I remember correctly.
And so for newer folks, tell us where the circle was and then how traffic would go in and out.
Pecan Bottoms had a complete circle. You come in on University Parks Drive, or you come in off of Herring, and it circled down by the roadway, actually went by the river, the public roadway, and it completed a circle. Well, when you get so many vehicles down there, the problem you run into is it's one way around, and anybody in that circle that stops completely clogged up the traffic. And you can't, and a lot of times people would complain because a lot of people say coming from church, come down University Parks Drive to go into the residential area. Well, they couldn't get in. And so that was one of the main problems that we had, not to mention some of the other stuff that was going on.
The decision to introduce mounted rangers into the park, it seems like part of that is to address this issue in that police officers couldn't move freely in the park. But can you talk a little bit about that change, the introduction of mounted rangers?
Yeah, actually, and I don't know what, I say I don't know what brought about the decision, but I'm sure the city felt like that, hey, we need to be able to do something to control the activities that went on in the park, because there was a lot of stuff going on that just didn't need to be, so to speak. So I guess in some point or another, the Parks Department decided, hey, maybe if we hire park rangers, we can curtail a lot of the activities. And I felt that way too. I just felt like what made the park, what drew the attention of the people to the park was there was no supervision and there was no authority. Because the police department, when I went to work for them, didn't have anybody down there. I think they started getting complaints about traffic, so they started sending, but there was a lot of other activity going on down there that didn't involve traffic, such as I saw dog fights, and people actually brought their dog down there to fight. So, I mean, it wasn't a coincidence where you have a dog and I have a dog and dogs just get off the chain and get it. They brought their dogs down. I saw people gambling, So these are some of the activities that a bunch of people went down there for. So you couple that with people just in the park, not involved in any of those activities. And the majority of the people that was in the park was not involved in those activities, but there was a lot of people that was involved in those activities. Now you couple that with not being able to get authority in there to do anything about it, and you got a mess. Yeah. So, but when they put park rangers in the park, and they actually put us in there in mounted units, people kind of noticed it kind of changed things, because all of a sudden now, what you weren't being watched doing, now you're being watched doing it. And a lot of people don't want to do it if they feel like that there's somebody with some authority that's noticing what's going on. Because there was a lot of good people in the park. I mean, I have actually been to the park. Well, I've been in the park all my life. So I know there was good people in the park. It was just a case of ain't nobody paying no attention. Yeah. Ain't no big deal. But when it became a big deal and they started noticing that the city started caring about it, it started changing in a hurry. Yeah. And so some of that stuff that you talked about, those activities had kind of grown over time because no one was supervising it. Exactly. Yeah, no one was exactly. One of the things they talked about, and I heard this a lot in my community, was they would actually go down there the night before, and Sunday was always a big day in the park, Pecan Bottom. They would actually go down there the night before and sleep on a picnic table so they could use it as a gambling device. I mean, they actually do that. Young guys would go down there and actually sleep on the picnic table. And when I first heard it, I thought, that's crazy. But, when you hear it from enough people, it's not hard to believe. And that's kind of was the case. And then we started witnessing it. But again, after they put park rangers in the park, it kind of changed a lot of stuff. And a lot of it was just being able to communicate with people. Being able to let them know, hey, you can't do that. Oh, we can't? So believe it or not, that's the response you got. Oh, we can't? No, you can't. Well, I'm interested in these early encounters when you first kind of go into the park. When the Ranger program started and you started in '86, how were you equipped? How were you trained? Any sort of special changes that came in with the Ranger program, or was it similar to what you were trying to do before? Well, it was totally different than what we was trying to do before. Originally, when I went in and worked, we just went in and worked as police officers.
Yeah.
And the biggest concern was traffic. Well, as park rangers, we went in with a total different training aspect. We actually, and most of our training was done through being mounted. We felt like being on a horse, being up above everybody gave us an advantage, and it gave us an advantage. And so we went through some PD training. We went through some psychological training. We trained mainly as a mounted unit. And I think that was one of the biggest things that the city could have done, one of the best things that the city could have done in terms of getting people's attention. Because when you go down there and I had a pretty good sized horse. When you go down there on a horse, you can do a couple of things. You first get people's attention, and you can move them real easy if you need to move them. So, and we were able to move around. So we weren't in traffic. We could actually go and we could actually see who's holding up traffic. And a lot of times, like I say, people they did it because they didn't feel like, hey, nobody's paying any attention. So but if you're right there and you're telling guys, hey, you can't stop here, you can't park here. I know you want to talk to her or whoever you want to talk to, but you got.
I would imagine it was usually her.
It was her, and trust me, the hers was down there to talk to him, and it created a problem.
Had you had much experience with horses before then?
A little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. I had a little bit of experience.
So there was a little learning curve there for you as well.
That was a big learning curve. I mean, I could ride a horse, but there was a lot of technique with handling a horse that I wasn't familiar with. But I'd been on horseback before, so that was the extent of my horse training. But I actually got legitimate horse training. I learned how to use certain techniques to get a horse to sidestep and, stuff like that. So pretty interesting.
When that opportunity presented itself, did you know that's what you wanted to do?
I didn't know. I just knew. I was told by somebody that the city was actually going to employ park rangers. I didn't have any detailed information. I didn't know if they were going to be commissioned law enforcement officers. I didn't know if I didn't know how they were going to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. But the one good thing I had going for me was I wasn't afraid of the park. I wasn't afraid of the people. I didn't think the people were bad people.
Yeah.
So I wasn't afraid of the park. So whichever direction they decided to go in, I was comfortable with that. Now, I didn't know I was going to do it for 30 years. I can say that. I didn't know I'd make 30 years, but I knew I'd give it a try because I thought it was something interesting. And it frustrated me sometimes with watching the traffic and seeing what was going on and having the idea that, they're only doing this because they feel like they can get away with it and nobody cares.
Yeah.
It's the only reason they're doing this. They're not bad people.
Well, one thing that you said there that I think was important is this was a period of time where some people were afraid of the park.
A lot of people were afraid of it, and they had good reason to be afraid of the park. I mean, think about a guy. Just think about Pecan Bottoms being full of people. And when I say full of people, I mean full of people. And a guy running a horse wide open down through there, and you have a child, and that child runs out in front of that horse. So I think people had reasons to be afraid, but I used to tell people all the time, I have my concerns about Cameron Park at nighttime. I do. I mean, I just, maybe from being in law enforcement or whatever, but I had no worries about Cameron Park during the day. I feel like it was as safe as HEB's parking lot during the day. But if you go down there at night, and you especially get out of the Pecan Bottoms area and you go into some of those other areas, you may have some problems.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But I'd like to talk about when you first went into the park on mounted units and maybe some memories you have initially of kind of that transition period where you trying to bring this thing under control, when it was kind of the wild, wild west out there for a while.
Well, yeah, and it's definitely the Wild West.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we went into the we originally went into the park long before we went into the park for battle, so to speak. You know, the park was a non-issue during weekdays, so we actually went into the park on weekdays, and we familiarized ourselves with the park. We familiarized ourselves with the trails. We familiarized ourselves with the horses. So we did a lot of that before we actually went in, say on a Sunday, knowing that the circumstances on Sunday was going to be totally different than the circumstances on Monday. And we basically went in and we engaged with people just to kind of give them an idea of what we're trying to do, not in the sense of we have the authority and you have to do what we say. We just kind of, hey, traffic needs to keep moving. We right off the bat eliminated a lot of stuff just by virtue of being there. Didn't have to do anything, just be there. And we eliminated the dog fighting. We eliminated the gambling, and we still had issues with people bringing horses down there. So we had to really just kind of get in and go, hey, this is not going to work. We have a horse trail, and you can keep your horse on the trail, but you're not allowed to ride horses inside the pecan bottoms and things like that. So we had to do some enforcement, but people complied. People complied. Now, we still had issues in the park. We had issues basically until we actually took the circle out. So it was a transition type thing, but it wasn't that big of a deal because people just had felt like nobody's watching and nobody cared.
I just don't know. I'm not in law enforcement. Making an arrest on horseback, I mean, how does that work? Is that working as a team if you've got to make an arrest? Well,
we basically what we did, if we observed something, one advantage we had was we were actually tied into the dispatch.
Okay, so you got radio.
We got radio, and we're actually tied in. We're directly in. We have the same radio that PD has, so we know we can monitor radio. We hear what's going on, and we can go if we need a police officer. We can get in the process of our training, we made it perfectly clear to Waco that we're not going to call you guys if we don't need you.
Yeah.
We're not just going to call you for anything.
Yeah.
So we kind of had a relationship because I was familiar with a lot of the police officers at that time. We kind of had a relationship that if we call you, we need you. So we were fairly comfortable with that. And there wasn't a lot of open activity that required people to be arrested, And if we saw something that involved the PD, we basically, our theory was we bring in the PD, we explain to them what we got, and we let them make the decision as to what happens from there.
Okay. Interesting. Now, you're on horseback. What other equipment do you have with you? I mean, what you mentioned, you've got a radio. How else are you, in this early period, how are you equipped as far as what do you have on you with your horse?
A radio and a flashlight. No weapons, no nightsticks, none of the police gear, because we didn't want people to perceive us. We had a badge. Yeah. So we had some authority.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to go in as police officers.
Yeah.
We was conscious of the fact that, hey, we want to go in, we want to be able to communicate with people, because the key for us is being able to communicate and being on the back of that horse.
Yeah.
So we very rarely got off the back of that horse.
Yeah.
And we didn't go in with, so to speak, police authority.
Yeah.
We went in and we tried to explain to people, okay, here's the reason you can't do that, And it worked. I think it worked for the most part. You always going to have a situation where it just don't work,
Yeah.
And when you get to the point to where it just don't work, then you stop trying to make it work and you just say, let me get an offside here and maybe they can make you understand, you can't do this.
Well, but you had a history working for DPS and with the Waco police. So did you ever reach for your hip? Did you ever get in a situation where you reached for your hip and then remembered,
you know, there was a time when there was conversations about being commissioned, about being armed, and we sat down and you know, and I kind of explained to guys that I've been on both sides of that fence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been on the side where you have a sidearm, and I've been on the side where you don't have a sidearm. And let me tell y'all don't realize it, but you're better off not having a weapon than you are having a weapon, because the one thing you're not is you're not a real threat to people, because you're not law enforcement. Now, if you got a gun and you start making arrests every day, you're gonna just become a regular police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think the administration and the Parks Department, I don't think they really wanted that. You know, I think they wanted the park back, but I think they wanted it back the way they wanted it back. I don't think because they could have easily said, hey, let's hire 5 police officers and send them down there and we can clean the park out. You know, I don't think they wanted that. I think they wanted people to come to the park. I think they wanted them to use the park, but I think they wanted them to understand that there's parameters for being able to use the park. You just can't do what you want to do. So I think that's why they come up with park rangers.
Well, and I also think, is one thing you're saying there also that if you had a sidearm, there may have been more violence in or how you'd been received?
I think it's how you've been received or perceived, and I think it's also how you would be perceived by the police department. Remember, one of the things I said was that if we needed a police officer, we could get a police officer in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And when I say in a hurry, especially as long as you was in the pecan bottoms area. Now, you get in some of the other areas, they may, where you? I can't find you, you know. But now, if you're commissioned, mm-hmm. and you have a weapon, I'm not sure how the police department would view that. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because the question becomes, what do you call it me for? Yeah. You know, what are you calling me for? You're a commissioned police officer. You have all the authority I have, so why don't you just go ahead and take care of it? Yeah. So I think that's the reason I was so hard pressed on being against it, and the fact that in a lot of cases we worked alone. Yeah, it would be one park ranger, and in all of my days at the police department, anytime there was a what they call a 1015, which is a domestic disturbance, they never sent one officer. Yeah, they never. So you got to realize you're out here by yourself. So if you commissioned, you may not be getting no backup. Yeah. You know, but if you uncommissioned, so to speak, and you find something, and one of the things I used to tell my guys all the time was, don't go into something that you weren't comfortable going into. You make that decision. Don't. If you're not comfortable, just leave it alone. Call the police department. You see a suspicious vehicle and you think it's something going down that's outside of our perimeters, just call the police officer. Mm-hmm. You can do that. You can get away with that, you know. But I don't know if you can get away with that if you commission. Yeah,
and you also talked a little bit, Larry, about how you use your horse as kind of not only a symbol of your authority, but you know, you don't get off the horse. That horse gives you an advantage that you don't want to lose.
It gives you a tremendous advantage you don't want to lose. I mean, you don't want to get off that horse, and you got 2 issues when you get off of that horse. Whatever situation you're fixing to deal with, you got a horse here, and you got a situation here. When you're on that horse, all you have to worry about is the situation that you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And even if it comes to separating people or moving people, there's nothing better than being on that horse, as opposed to you being on the ground trying to make that decision and hoping somebody is on their way.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
so.
That's right. Yeah. I've spent a few years, not as many years as you, but I've spent a few years in the park, and I kind of have a mental map of the park and the areas of the park, but I'd love to pick at yours and just think about kind of how you kind of think about the different. We've talked a lot about pecan bottoms, but how you think about the different areas of the park and kind of how that's in your mind as you think about the park. And this evolves over time, I understand, but yeah.
Well, the problem area, or what we perceive to be the problem area of the park, was pecan bottoms, and basically sometimes through the week, but mainly on weekend, on a Sunday. The rest of the park was just as quiet and calming as you can get. Now, the last few years I was in the park, they installed restrooms in some locations where they didn't have restrooms, and so a lot of times you would be in the park and you would catch men, never caught no women, men in the bushes, and I always attributed it to the fact that there's no restroom, and that question used to come up all the time. Why can't? It's too expensive. You have to have lift stations. You have to do this. Well, they finally went and did it, and that cut out a lot of because people come to the park for picnics and they bring alcoholic beverages, and you drink a few beers, your bladder is going to let you know. So we ran across quite a bit of that.
Yeah. Public urination,
basically
like that.
What it boils down to. Yeah, we ran across quite a bit of public urination, and we kind of leaned on the side of this guy's trying his best to hide. We kind of leaned on that side. This guy's trying his best to hide. So, and in a lot of cases we brought it to people's attention, but we weren't out to get people, so to speak. We never developed that attitude.
Yeah.
And when I was kind of took over, I definitely didn't have the approach of let's try to get people. We're not looking for people to write tickets to, or if they're doing something that requires law enforcement or that requires being arrested, that's fine. There's nothing you can do about that. But let's not go and try to find stuff to arrest people for or to call the police for, because we want people to come to the park. We want people to visit the park. We want them to have a good time, and but we want them to understand can't take our trees.
Yeah.
You can't take our trees. City has and that's a hard thing to get over to people too, is the fact that city has an ordinance that don't allow you to take dead vegetation out. And people will go, well, the tree was already down. It doesn't make any difference because we don't know the tree was already down. So we deal with a lot of that.
People trying to harvest things
Yes.
out.
Yes.
Yeah. Any people planting things out in the park?
No.
Okay.
No. We didn't get that end of it. We got a lot of people actually, small trees and stuff like that, actually digging them up and taking them and most of the people probably, you can tell when you've run across somebody that actually really didn't think. It's just a small tree. It's not that big of a deal. Yes, it is if everybody decide they want to take one. You make them understand that.
Yeah.
Think about it from this perspective. If it was just open to the public and you had the free run to just come down here and take trees, we wouldn't have no trees. And we've had people. I know one of my rangers used to always. He was adamant. He lives in the country. He's a country guy, and he was adamant. People used to tell him. He used to tell me. People used to tell him all the time. Man, I seen a big old snake right over there, and he go, "They live out here." So.
You mentioned the park during the day and the park at night. I guess what hours are you patrolling? I mean, or is there a presence in the park?
We have certain areas in the park that we actually close.
Okay.
Some of the Lawson's Point. I'm trying to remember them now. It's been a minute since
mouth of the Bosque. Yeah. Emmons Cliff or whatever. Yeah.
Lover's Leap.
Yeah.
We have areas that we actually close, and we typically close those areas. The park has a curfew. to begin with. It has an actual curfew, with the exception of the public roadways. And the road that goes in and out of the park is considered a public roadway, so it didn't have no closures. But the different sites had closures, and we normally close those areas around midnight. So we had rangers working up until midnight.
Okay.
And after midnight, we would lock those areas up, and that pretty much that's late as we went.
Okay. Well, you said night was different.
It was.
It is. So talk about after sunset being in some of these areas.
Well, you get after the sun goes down, and you can't actually lay out on the ground with a pallet or a blanket and have a picnic. You get other type of activity that moves in. You know, you get people that's meeting people to sell stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting people that's meeting people to get involved in other activities. So that's kind of, and what happens is, you as a park patron don't want to accidentally run up on that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't want to accidentally run up on that, because the city of Waco, and every city has what they call plainclothes police officers, narcotic agents, and you pretty much could be mistaken for one, and you just don't know what could happen. So that's what I mean when I say that different type of activity that goes on. And that's one of the reasons I told my guys, if you see something that looks suspicious and you're not comfortable approaching that vehicle, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that. Don't you make the decision. I'm not comfortable with approaching that vehicle. Something's not right. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Just stand back, call Waco. Hey, this is what I've got, you know, and this is the reason I think that something's going on. You let them handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
were there cases where you found yourself in a situation that you didn't realize what you were getting yourself into?
not me.
Okay.
Not me, because I had experience. I guess it was my experience, and I was familiar with it, and I kept it. I kept it in my head when I was actually out there working. Mm-hmm. So you can pretty much. I say you could pretty much. I just had. I had this theory that if it made my heart beat faster, it's probably not a good idea. You know, and I carried that with me. Mm-hmm. I actually carried that with me throughout the time I worked there. Now, I wasn't afraid. I was just cautious of what could be. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of worked. And I kind of preached that because I didn't want anybody to get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want us to get hurt, because once you get a park ranger hurt or you get somebody down, the city's got to rethink. Okay, what are we doing? And as far as I know during the time I worked on, we never got anybody hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah. I think I attribute it to the fact that if you don't feel comfortable, then don't approach that vehicle, because you don't know.
Yeah. But it sounds like some of your rangers did get themselves in a situation.
I'm trying to think back.
Yeah.
I know it happened.
Yeah.
I know it happened.
Yeah.
On several occasions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know it. But the one thing when we did sit down and have a discussion about it was the fact that I was comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was comfortable up until the point where I wasn't comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Were there occasions where you would call in another ranger in a certain situation if you felt like you needed that level of backup? You didn't want to necessarily call Waco PD?
Yeah. That happened. That happened all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That happened all the time. We would actually we may have 2 or 3 rangers working, and we may have 1 in one vehicle and 2 in another vehicle, and we always, hey, I've got a suspicious looking vehicle up here, Lover's Leap, and you know, I want you head this way. So we did that. We did that all the time.
Yeah, and
that could be the case where we had a lot of issues with people being on the other side of the wall.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We had a lot of issues with that. And one of the things one of my rangers said to me was, every time he talked to people over there, they would go, "Oh, I'm not gonna fall." He said, "That's the first thing somebody said after they fell."
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm not gonna fall." But we had a lot of problems with that. We actually had to go up because we didn't have any signage. We had an ordinance that prohibits you from being on the other side of the wall, but we didn't have any signage. So we put up signs. We did all kind of stuff. It didn't seem to deter people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just when I took that job, I actually went up to Lovers League, and I could walk to the edge of that cliff and put my feet on the edge of that cliff. When I retired, I couldn't do it. I didn't have the nerve to walk. And what a lot of people didn't realize, and I didn't either growing up, was a lot of that rock is Austin chalk, and it's very, very,
it's very brittle, right?
Brittle,
yeah,
very brittle, and you just never know when you're standing there and a piece gives away, and your feet slip out from under you, and you're in bad shape at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the most dangerous area of the park is that area. Did y'all develop kind of a protocol for how you would handle those sorts of things? Because it seems like it would happen every so often. That
and it did, yeah. and basically because we didn't carry the equipment or have the manpower, we left it to the fire department. Mm-hmm. We basically, if we found a situation, and there have been people to fall and not fall all the way to the bottom.
Yeah.
Well, we basically, because we weren't a rescue service or anything, we didn't try to provide anything. But hey, we get in the fire department, and the fire department has repelling equipment and all kind of stuff, so they can handle that situation. So that's kind of the way we roll with that.
Okay. Yeah, and of course there may be a situation where they need to bring something in by boat if they go all the way down.
And they did that. Yeah. They've had people. I said they had some people that didn't get all the way to the bottom. They had a bunch of people that got all the way to the bottom, and the way to get them out was by boat. Mm-hmm. So and we actually had a boat. Yeah, we when Baylor opened up its new stadium, we knew that there was going to be some issues on the water. Mm-hmm. So the city actually got us a boat, and we actually patrol. And patrolling by boat is very valuable because it gives us access to that bottom river trail, and we're actually able to see up without having to get out of the vehicle, walk down through there, and do all that. So it has some value to it too.
Yeah, that river trail is the most used trail in the park.
In the park, yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And seeing we had a park ranger, Matt Keel, Baylor student, and he became a game warden. So he actually called me, great kid, great young man. Mm-hmm. He actually called me and he says, "Hey, I can ride on y'all's boat sometimes if you want me to." I said, "Man, you can ride on our boat anytime we take it out." He said, "But my only problem, Larry, is if I see a violation, I have to issue him a ticket." Mm-hmm. I said, "It's fine with me. That's fine." So he rode a couple of times, you know. So it gave us some legitimacy. It gave us some authority, you know. And he never rode any tickets with me. Mm-hmm. He may have ridden tickets with other guys, but I thought it was a great venture because he would come down and he'd get on the boat, and you know they'd actually patrol. And when you got a game warden saying this is the way it is, then people have a tendency to pay attention.
Yeah. Even as you're talking about the river, I started thinking about what it's been called different things, Brazos Park East or Cameron Park East, which was a confusing thing, to call it. So how was use over there? I mean, how did that evolve kind of on that side of the river?
It was used, but it wasn't used nearly as much as, or even like Cameron Park, which was a mystery to me. I always thought that it's so much easier to go over there and conjugate over there, and even with the road, it was not a public roadway. So if you went down there and it blocked traffic, it wasn't that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But they never, for some
Just
reason,
didn't get much use.
Didn't get much use.
Yeah.
Didn't get much use at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all the convenience. It has restroom facilities. It has pavilions. It has horseshoe pits. It has boat ramps. It has all the convenience of Cameron Park. But for some reason, it just never got to use.
Yeah.
You know, they bypassed that area to get to Cameron Park.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always a mystery to me.
Yeah, I always thought one of the reasons they called it Cameron Park East was to try to get people over there, but then it got confused in which part of Cameron Park.
And I think they renamed it now?
Yeah, is it
Brazos Park East?
Yeah, it's Brazos Park East or Brazos River East or something like that.
I think they renamed it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I knew I wanted to apologize for, Larry, is I was a Baylor freshman in 1986. So if I had a date and we wanted to kiss, we couldn't stay in the dorm, and so we would go to places. So I know one of the things you were busting up over there is Baylor students that were kissing each other, or at least, who knows what was going on.
We'll leave it at kissing each other.
but I know that was probably a continual annoyance as people parking in the park. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of until we eliminated a lot of it when we got the gates.
Mm-hmm.
We went in and got the gates, and we had a lot of resistance to the gates. People didn't want them. People didn't want to see us, block off certain areas and not allow traffic in all through the night. And the theory was, what's in the park after midnight? What's in the park?
Yeah.
Baylor students kissing.
But just the idea that you're not really limiting the public's access if you close it at midnight.
Correct.
Yeah. When did y'all start doing that? Do you remember around about?
Ooh.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I thought about that question because
Yeah.
I knew that question. I had a feeling that question was going to come up, and I was trying to run it through my head.
Yeah.
When did we actually put those gates in? And to be honest with you, I cannot remember. I can't.
But it's been some time that they've been there.
I want to say since 90.
Yeah.
I want to say since 90.
Yeah.
We installed those gates and started, and we've had some of the issues we've had is people getting locked inside, or people leaving their car. One vehicle picking up somebody else, driving out of the park, leaving the vehicle in, and not coming back to get it till after midnight and realize, it's
trapped.
It's trapped, So we had quite a bit of that early on. I think at some point they kind of got the point that, hey, it's you need to be out by midnight.
One of the things that comes with you guys being in there and patrolling the park so closely is you start to realize some of the improvements like that are really needed in the park. And I'm thinking a little bit about the Centennial and the improvements that came with the Centennial, but gates is obviously an improvement if you want to come up with a way to kind of control activity in the park in a good way. Were there some other things that you feel like y'all's exposure and work with the park helped you realize needed to be changed and needed to be improved?
Well, I think the biggest thing was the gates.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the next biggest thing was we actually put restrooms in locations where we didn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a plus for the park. And we did a lot of park improvement. They did quite a bit of park improvement. And I just think that it had probably, I don't know how long it had been since the city invested any money in the park, but I think when they started investing money in the park, I think people started realizing, hey, you know what, this is a nice place, and let's just not drive along the street and throw our McDonald's bag out. Let's, the city care, so we ought to care too. And I think that gets people's attention. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer that if you take care of something, people will help you take care of it. Mm-hmm. So we did some improvements, especially when Rusty Black became the director, and he's the type of guy. He's gonna push a little bit for what he believes, and he did that. He did that with the park. They put in some curbs, they improved some streets, they put in some restrooms, they redid Redwood Shelter area, you know, because it was a gravel parking lot. I'm pretty sure when you was in school, it was a gravel parking lot, and they redid. They put a footbridge from Pecan Bottoms over to Redwood Shelter. So there's a lot of things they did. They went down to what is the pavilion that has a little waterfall. It's
Proctor Springs.
Mm-hmm. They ran in and did a ton of work in Proctor Springs. Mm-hmm. They put a path from Pecan Bottoms over to Proctor Springs. So they did a lot of work, and I think that I think the citizens appreciated it, and I think it shows. I really do. I think it shows. I think because people are not so much to trash it out. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that I think really, really made the park much more of a family environment.
Yeah, and that's something I think you were getting at earlier. You still had families trying to use the park, but you had this other activity.
Well, people were afraid.
Yeah,
people were afraid for a number of reasons. You know, first of all, they were intimidated by a group of whatever numbers just kind of hanging around, and my grandmother doesn't want to hear a 19-year-old's conversation. It don't work. She just doesn't want to hear it, you know. So you got these kids over here, and they're not talking to their group. They're talking to everybody. You know, they're talking with their group, but they're talking to everybody, and you can hear the conversation, and it becomes intimidating. Even the people that try, they go, nah, I'm going home. I'm gonna move, and so that's what we got. So we didn't get those family activities in Pecan Bottom, but we did get a lot of family activities in other areas, even on weekends in the park. We just didn't get it in that area, right? And that was the most dominant area. Yeah, we just didn't get it in that area right there.
Yeah. Do you have noise? The city has a noise ordinance, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you police that if you're in the park as far as?
Well, when I went in the park, the city didn't have a radio noise ordinance.
Okay.
Remember later on they came out with an ordinance that actually curtailed how loud you could play your music. They didn't have that when I went in the park. Okay. And we didn't have a vehicle noise ordinance because we had nobody going over 3 miles an hour. So we weren't ripping up pipes and doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so we really wasn't really a big concern of ours as far as noise was concerned. And we did get I can remember distinctly a young man that had a Jeep, and I don't know what he had to pay for those speakers, but he actually could light up the bridge. You know, he'd go under the Herring Street Bridge, and he'd always get him a parking spot. So that means he'd come early because you're looking at this only took place for about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours. But he would always get him a spot under the Herring Street Bridge, and you could hear his music pretty much everywhere. And we didn't have an ordinance that prohibited him from doing it.
I see. Yeah, he had a natural kind of it would magnify his sound there under the bridge.
I guess so.
Yeah. Well, Larry, when do you think the kind of the public perception of the park started changing a little bit, and you know those areas of use? Because I think of Pecan Bottoms now as a very family area. Yes. Splash pad there, people having picnics and walking along the river.
I think when the city, when the first thing the city did was take the circle out. Mm-hmm. That helped. Mm-hmm. The second thing the city did was they put a pavilion down there. They put a restroom down there, and they put a splash pad down there. I think when they did that work there, it completely changed the perception of Pecan Bottom. Mm-hmm. And I think the part of the reason that Pecan Bottoms had the perception it had was because it didn't have any family activities.
Yeah.
You know, now you're inviting families to come down because you got the splash pad, you got restroom facilities, you know, you got a pavilion. So I think whatever year that was, and don't make me go back and try to remember what year that was, but whatever year that was, I think that changed the perception of the park greatly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's the gateway to the park.
Yes, yes, and they've done a lot of good things since I've been gone. So I've seen some of the animals that they put down there that, you know, and I think all that is kind of family oriented because you can take your young kids down there and you can have a conversation about some of the animals that's down there. Well, they didn't have that. They didn't have that back. They actually, when I went in 85 and 86, they didn't have nothing.
Yeah.
It was just a big open space area, you know. So how inviting is that?
Yeah, even putting the zoo in there.
Yeah.
And what a destination and a draw that is for families.
That's made a big difference. But I think some of the things that they've done in the park has made a tremendous difference, and I think it's made the park become more of a. Because I've seen people. We have people down there that would bring their kids through the week, and they get in the splash pad, and my daughter had her kid birthday down. So there's some things that and a lot of people see this type of activity. They go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. They go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know, they don't, because again, I said, these weren't bad people. These are not bad people. It's just that if you're not watching me, I might have a tendency to do something I wouldn't normally do. Mm-hmm. But when you got people down there, you got adults down there, responsible adults down there, you got children down there, I'm gonna do something different.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's not that I'm going to stop doing it. I'm just going to go somewhere else.
I'm just going to go somewhere else. You're exactly right. I'm not going to stop doing it. I'm just going to go somewhere else. A little bit more isolated area, you know. I'm not going to do it out here in the public in front of these kids. And I think that's what changed the perception of the park.
Mm-hmm. Were there any stories you can kind of remember of other areas? I just thinking, you know, there's areas in the park that you can be where you might as well be 100 miles away from civilization. I mean,
when you get off the road.
Yeah, when you get off the road and you get back on some of those trails, there's really areas of the park you can get in that are wilderness. I mean, it's really wilderness.
Yes. The most beautiful area in the park, is when you go down from Lover's Leap toward MCC. Mm-hmm. There's an area back there that people don't even frequent that is beautiful. I mean, the vegetation is beautiful. It ain't been trampled on. I mean, it is literally it's gorgeous back there. And we've been back there on occasion. We didn't go a lot because there's nobody back there, but it is really, really a beautiful area. Mm-hmm. Now there's no picnic area back there, or you know, you really can't. I wouldn't suggest you lay in the grass back there because I don't know what you'd run across. But as far as beauty, it's a beautiful area.
Mm-hmm. What's that area called?
I don't think it has a name.
It doesn't have a name. Because one thing I thought about with this, if you're going to respond to certain areas, some of these areas didn't really have names to them. You had to come up with.
Well, we went in though. We went in, and the areas between, the mouth of the Bosque, we went in and actually. We labeled all that, and I want to say somebody from Baylor helped us do it. Okay. But we've got trails named. Yeah. We put up some location markers. So we created a map that you can actually open the map, look at it, and see where you are. So we've identified. Before I left, a lot of areas that was kind of blank, so to speak, kind of like what the county did when they come up with 911. Yeah, you know, they named this street and well, we did a lot of that in the park. Yeah,
all the trails are named, even difficulty ratings on the trails,
and they serious too. Yeah, trust me, they're serious. Some of those bike trails are serious.
But even those are the things that bring in the bikers.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, if you're a serious biker, if you're a serious biker, you know, I've talked to guys from a lot of different places, and they tell me, hey, man, y'all got some of the best bike trails in the state of Texas, if not in the United States. But again, you know, you really have to, you get off on the wrong trail, it can become dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can actually become dangerous. I wasn't a bike guy. I rode a bike. We had bikes too, and I rode a bike a little bit, but I just didn't want to get beat up. So, you know, I was kind of moving on in age, and I wasn't thrilled. But I had some guys that was Kim Jennings. I don't know if you're familiar with Kim. Kim was a biker, and she, you know, she tackled some of those trails, and I talked to some of those guys, and they tell me, you come over here and that trail drops straight down, you know, and so you have to know how to maneuver your gears and do this and do that, because, you know, or if not, you're going to tumble.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a given, you're going to tumble, so it can become dangerous.
Yeah, definitely, quickly.
Yeah.
Any other areas that are kind of favorite areas of the park for you?
Yeah, I probably favor Lover's Lake more than any area in the park.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I guess because of the view. You know, beautiful view. And especially when they went in with some of the remodeling, where they put in some parking areas where you right there by the wall and you can just get out, and some picnic areas and stuff. So I probably favor Cameron Park more so than any other area in the park. But I liked them all. I thought it was a beautiful park.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I thought it was a beautiful park, and I liked all the areas.
It's an interesting solution they came up with for the fence problem at Lover's Leap, you know, because the idea of how do you keep the view, and put in a fence, and I thought the solution they came up with this last solution when they did the Centennial kind of remodel up there, where you can still see over it, but you still have the fence.
And there was a lot of conversation about that Centennial,
Mm-hmm.
lot of conversation about the Centennial issues, you know, because at one time they talked about putting up kind of a mesh after the wall and putting up a mesh fence, and I guess they settled on, hey, let's try to just monitor it, keep people on the right side of the wall. We don't want to take away from the beauty by adding a whole bunch of stuff. So, you know, but I agree with you. I think what they did really shaped up.
Yeah, if you had a motivated idiot, I mean, they're going to find their way.
Yes, and I think that was the final conclusion.
Yeah,
there's no way we're gonna be able to prevent everybody from getting on the other side of that fence or that wall. I don't care what we do. Somebody's gonna, if they're motivated enough, or if they have enough alcohol in them, they're gonna find a way to get over there.
That's right.
And alcohol played a big part in it. It played a huge part in it.
Yeah. And I'm sure created some of your problems.
Oh, well, you get guts. It gives you a false sense of, maybe I can fly.
I've heard it called liquid courage.
Liquid
right?
courage, you're exactly right. I agree with that. You see a person today that has a lot of liquid courage, and you see them the next day, and you wonder, are they the same people? You know, that's the same guy.
So it's just really interesting, Larry, in talking to you, because you experienced the park as a kid, and then you spent so many years in the park, working the park as a job. And how do you kind of think of the park today as you kind of think about Cameron Park and Waco?
I don't go to the park a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not a place. You know, and I attribute that to the fact that I spent 30 years working in the park.
Yeah.
You know, so when I got a chance to get out of the park, you know, I took advantage of it. But from what I hear, and I don't hear a lot, but from what little bit I do hear, it's such a wonderful place. It's such a better place.
Yeah.
It's a better place than what it was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And I think that's what people want. You know, I heard negative stuff about the park long before I worked in the park.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not hearing that today.
Yeah.
And that's not to say some stuff ain't going on, but I'm just not hearing it. Back in the day, it ran rapid. You just all the time, something happening all the time. So, all kind of stuff. A stolen car in the park, a paper machine that somebody done stole off the street and dropped it in the park. So it just all the time, and I'm not hearing that today. I'm hearing the park be more of a park, so to speak, being used for what it was intended for. So
yeah,
I have good memories of the park. I just don't go.
Yeah. I think of the reputation it had in kind of the 60s and 70s, and
yes,
when people just, stopped going.
Yes.
And so I think now when people talk about what's great about Waco, usually one of the top things they mention is Cameron Park.
Oh yeah, and I think a big part of that is the trails.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people to tell me, hey, I drove down here from San Antonio just to ride these trails.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're right. I think a big part of it is, I think Cameron Park has become an asset.
Mm-hmm. I hope you take a little credit for that. I think you should take a little credit for that.
Somebody was gonna get it done.
Well, it's not just as you said earlier out of your mouth. It's not just getting it done; it's how you did it. And I think the way that y'all did it was the smoothest and the most effective way to do it, because it wasn't just about policing the park.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I now from that aspect, I agree. I think first of all, with the city getting the right people, and I do think they got the right people. With the city getting the right people, and the right people having the right mindset in our approach to how we want to get it done, I think I can take a little credit for that. But I think eventually it was gonna get done. Whether it got done this way or whether it got done this way, I just feel like it was gonna get done.
Yeah,
it had to get done because I think it had become such a sore spot for the city of Waco, and it's such a beautiful place. And I don't think they could just turn it loose. So they had to decide. Somebody had to decide, hey, how are we gonna do it? And I think the way we did it has a lasting effect more so than just going in, working, policing it, and then backing out.
Yeah. Well, I know from your almost 30 years in Cameron Park. That's right. You retired in
2017.
Oh, okay. So 31 years in the park, or 32 years in the park. There's got to be some stories that kind of stick with you. And you don't have to name names, but I'd love to hear kind of some stories that you tell of kind of your time there, or maybe some things you ran into that kind of stick with you as far as stories go.
I ran into a lot of stuff. I don't even know where to begin because there was so much going on when we actually went into the park. And I definitely wouldn't name names for part of the reason is I don't remember the names. Let me tell you, I tell people all the time that when being a police officer ruined my name memory, if it's any such thing. Because when as a police officer, the very first thing you do is you pull out your pad and you get the person's name. And once they give you that name, and you remember you're doing this 20 times a night, that name just goes away. It just goes away. And so I'm horrible when it comes to names because it just, you do this 5 days a week. You do, and like I said, you're doing it 20 on a busy night. You're doing it 20 times a night because you got to have that information to make a report. And the first thing you do is, I need your name. So people will come up to me and give me their names. But as far as working in the park, we witnessed a little of everything. Be honest, we witnessed.
Yeah, you got to tell me a story, Larry. I'm gonna make you tell me a story.
I'm trying to think of a.
It just hit. I could tell it just hit.
No, I've got some stories. I just don't know if I can tell them. I've got some stories. I mean, I trust me when I tell you we witnessed a little of everything. We witnessed a little of everything in the park, and I've got some stories. I just don't know what stories I'm at liberty to discuss. I mean, you got to imagine you got a park where you didn't have people, and there was as much activity in some of the isolated areas as there were in the open areas. The open areas was a Sunday issue with traffic and stuff like that. The isolated areas carried a lot of other stuff that we witnessed. I'll give you an example. There was a you gonna make me do this.
I'm gonna make you do this.
There was a guy, and I was riding with a female park ranger because we hired a female. She come on when I came on. Actually, she still works for the city, so she's got more time than I had. She doesn't work in the park anymore, but she works for the city. This is in the middle of the day. There's a guy laying on a park bench, completely undressed. And your mind says, is this guy, you're trying to process this. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. There's no traffic. There's no other people. There's nobody there. And this guy's laying there. So your mind you're trying to process this by going, what's the deal? And so it's almost, it's kind of like, okay, we got to go talk to this guy.
Well, you just said, the way you are, you want to assess, kind of have a real assessment of the situation. Yes. So you're trying to figure out, what is this?
Think about it. I mean, if he was streaking, you would go, okay, this guy is streaking. He's an exhibitionist or something. That's what would go through your mind.
Yeah.
But this is kind of an isolated area. So you and I say isolated. It wasn't. It was. If there had been traffic, then people would have seen him.
Yeah.
But this is an area where there wasn't a lot of
still
traffic.
A public area.
Still a public area.
Yeah.
So we go over there, and you're running this process through your mind, and you're asking yourself now, is this guy going to be competent? Is he going to be okay? Is he going to be a mental case? I mean, what's the deal? You're preparing yourself. So she goes, what's your problem? And he goes, I was just being curious. That's what he says. That's what the guy says. I was just being curious. We're thinking, we're thinking, okay, we have the authority to bar you away from the park. By ordinance, we have the authority to. We used to think we had the authority. We found out later on we didn't. But we used to think we had the authority to bar people away from the park permanently.
Oh, really? Okay.
But we found out we didn't. You can't bar them permanently.
Yeah.
So she says, you know what? She says, we're going to issue this guy a warning, and we're going to bar him away from the park. And he may have been one of the guys that was barred away permanently, until we found out from the city attorney, you
can't really do that.
Can't really do that. You don't have the authority you think you have. And I don't know if we read it or misread it or was told. I mean, I don't know, but we found out that I think 12 months was the extent that we could actually bar them not committing some type of felony crime or some kind of crime against people. And so we decided we'd issue this guy a ticket. And so we did. And he says, after he tells us he was just being curious, he said, "So you guys are acting like I was trying to hurt somebody." I don't know how to respond. I mean, I don't really, I mean, you're in a public place. you, he's laying on his stomach. You're laying on your stomach. And how do we explain somebody that comes through here in a family vehicle with a family? Mm-hmm. How do we explain that? I mean, think about, how do we explain that? What you do is your business and it's fine, but how do we explain to somebody who tells us, hey, there's a guy laying up there on the pavilion with no clothes on? A father doesn't want to explain that to his son or daughter or nobody, yeah. So that's where the issue comes in. But he really acted as though he was offended at the fact. So our mindset was, how long has he been doing that? But that's kind of some of the stories we got early on. And again, I don't ever remember seeing the guy again. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he had done it before, how long he had been doing it, or what the case was, or he just thought, hey, nobody comes around this area, so I'm just gonna lay here and sunbathe, or if But that's kind of, and it's only drastic because of the response of the person. Yeah. That's what makes it drastic. It ain't, But,
yeah.
We ran across a lot of stuff.
Well, it seems to me, is it wilderness or is it a park? And it seems like some people, like this guy, thinking, oh, I'm out in wilderness, I'll just do, whatever I want to do. But it is a park. It is a city park. Yeah.
I think he may have thought that, with the exception of there's a public road, there's a roadway. And I'm thinking this guy was at Lawson's Point. I'm trying to remember the different points. I think he was at Lawson's Point. And all of the points have the only real public roadway is University Parks and Cameron Park Drive that actually runs. But there's roads through the different points. Yeah. And anywhere that had he been, say, I was telling you the area from Lover's Leap, between Lover's Leap and MCC. Mm-hmm. Had he been laying back there, you might kind of throw your hands up and go, oh, okay. But I can drive by and see you. Yeah. So that should kind of trigger something in your mind that maybe this ain't the place to be laying. So that I don't know. But we have some wilderness areas, but we didn't have a lot of problem in the wilderness areas because you have to get there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're not accessible.
Yeah, they're not accessible. So we didn't have a lot of problem in those areas. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that concerned me was I was in there one night and I seen a Baylor student, female, going into the trail at night. Going, not coming out, going. And I thought, why would she do that? Mm-hmm. Why would she do that? Of course, I couldn't keep up with her. I was actually in a vehicle, and she was actually there, riverside, right off of across from Redwood, shit, where it goes down into the trail. She was going down into the trail. It was dark. Yeah. And I'm thinking, why would she do that? Mm-hmm. But I never heard anything, so yeah. Mm. I'm assuming maybe she was a black belt in karate or something. She wasn't worried about it. But those are some of the things that concern you. Mm-hmm. When you see people doing stuff that could potentially lead to problems.
That's right, because they're not doing anything illegal, but they're making choices that could be problematic. Yeah,
you're exactly right.
Yeah. Well, any other stories you want to tell me?
No.
I got that one out of you.
No,
all right, okay.
I don't have no more stories.
All right, well, if you're listening to the podcast and you see Larry on the street, just ask him. He'll tell you. He'll tell you a story he don't want to tell you right now. I really, Mr. Sims, I really appreciate your service to the city for so many years. And Cameron Park is a wonderful place, and me and my family enjoy it. And I feel like you had a role in making it a place that families could enjoy. And so I want to thank you for your service to the city.
I appreciate that.
For all those years. And And I appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about kind of your experiences of the park. Anything else you want to tell me before we sign off here?
No stories.
Okay.
No stories. I don't have.
There's nothing litigious that we've gotten into so far. So I think you're clear. Well, thank you, Mr. Sims.
The Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
San Antonio.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.